This is Warren Vanderhill interviewing Professor Ken Davis, Muncie Jewish Oral History Project 2, and the date is January 24, 2003. Ken, I want to thank you at the outset for agreeing to participate in the study. And as with all the participants, I've been asking them a kind of general question by way of introduction, and that is to ask you why you came to Muncie initially, and if there might have been other options in your life at the time you decided to come here.
Well, I think one of the reasons that I came to Muncie was its proximity to Ohio. I was born and raised in Ohio. I came originally from Cleveland, and I didn't want to go too far away from my roots, so to speak, and I did investigate other opportunities that were nearby, such as Wittenberg University, but the problem with Wittenberg, as I recall, was that it was, I believe, a Lutheran institution, and I just didn't think I would be completely comfortable in an institution of that sort. And the opening in the art department at Ball State came up, and it kind of attracted me for the reasons I mentioned. And I got the job, and I've been here since. I did teach in Cleveland for a while in the public school systems, but I didn't want to continue with that, so I did feel I wanted to move, but I didn't want to move very far. When I came to Muncie, I thought it was close in some respects, but I discovered that in many ways it was really very far from my normal experiences growing up in Cleveland and even living as a graduate student in Columbus and Cincinnati. Because of the smallness of the city, for one thing, I really had never lived in a city of this size. And also the fact that I had two young children made me think of other issues that I had never really thought about prior to coming here. And I didn't really find it at first all that conducive. I didn't really join the temple my first year here. I just was trying to get my bearings. I didn't really join the temple, so I didn't really see what the possibilities were as far as religion or religious affiliation. But after I joined the temple, we got involved with all of the activities, and our first son was actually born here in Muncie. Not sorry, the younger son. My second son was born here, and it was really a very nice kind of birth commemoration. The ceremony is called a bris, and the entire community turned out for that, and I always remember that very fondly. The vast majority of those people, however, are no longer here. But it was really a very nice event, and it's kind of a paradox in the way that even though the community was so small, they didn't really know me very well. Nevertheless, they all turned out for this ceremony, for this bris, and that was very nice, and I have very good memories of that. I'm not sure if
well, that comments a little bit on what you thought of Muncie when you came here, although you can add to that if you want to, but I'm trying to get some contrast since you've been here for several years, you've been part of the community, both the academic community and the temple community and the larger Muncie community. But I'd just like to have you reflect a little bit on some of the ways that you might see Muncie having changed in the years that you've been part of the community.
Oh, okay. I think it's changed a lot in terms of the demographics of the community. I think the community in general doesn't have very many families with young children. I think there were a lot more families that had younger children. In fact, my two boys were members of a temple youth group. There were sufficient numbers at that time to have at least a temple youth group. It wasn't very large, but at least it was a functioning group that met and had officers. And it did provide some reinforcement for their heritage. But now I don't see those sorts of things happening, and I think a lot of it is due to the demographics. That is, I don't think the numbers are here. And of course, this is in a way not new. I don't know whether you can say this is new, because I mentioned to you I read Bernard Friend's commentary, and he mentions how he remembered listening to a person by the name of Schoenfield back in the 30s talk about how the community has declined precipitously. And so I really wonder whether this is something totally new. It just seems like it's maybe cyclic. I don't know whether it's something totally new or not. It's hard for me to statistically reinforce the point I'm making here.
So tell me a little bit about what your life was like before you came to Muncie as a member of a Jewish community, or it might be Jewish communities based on different places where you might have lived.
Actually, before I came to Muncie, I wasn't really a formal member of a Jewish community. The years I spent in Columbus and Cincinnati, I was a student, and I didn't have the time or the finances to participate in a formal Jewish community. And my first child was born in Columbus, and when we moved from Columbus, he was only about a year and a half, and we really didn't see a need to be a member of a Jewish community during those years. When I was growing up in Cleveland, my parents were very Jewish in some respects. In other respects, they weren't all that Jewish in the sense that they had membership in a temple. But yet, because I was surrounded with such a large community, I always had these outside reinforcements as well as the immediate reinforcements of my immediate family, my parents. And the temple, as an institution, wasn't that big an issue because I had all of these other things that I was constantly, being reminded of who I was.
Right.
Okay. And but when I got to Muncie, there was nothing here. I mean, I had no family, and I had 2 young children, so I had to think of their situation. So it was a completely new kind of situation for me. So it really is not something that, in a way that I was prepared for.
You touched on this a little bit, but again, let me be more specific. How important right now is being a member of Temple Bethel to you in your own life?
It's become less important for various reasons. One of which is, to be quite specific or honest about it, is financial. Okay. As I near retirement, I kind of think that the financial sacrifice is something that I have to give a lot more attention to. And whether or not the financial sacrifice is really, in a sense, worth what I'm getting back from the temple in terms of the needs I have and the temple's ability to fulfill those needs. As I said, I don't have young children, and I spent many years working for the temple, in a voluntary capacity as membership chairperson, trying to get members, keep track of members in an administrative sort of way, and those sorts of things. And right now, I'm not in that capacity. So my ties to the temple have become very tenuous, a lot more tenuous. I mean, I still feel about my Judaism the same way as I always have, but I mean, as far as my ties to the temple, they're somewhat weaker for those reasons. Not because I feel less Jewish or anything like that.
Right.
So, I'm not sure if that's what you...
No, that's exactly right.
What you are looking for here.
Well, it is. I mean, I think what I'm concerned about is people in this study I found at times are very involved in the congregation, and then they're not for a while, and then sometimes they come back, or they're involved for a while, and then based on their life experience, as you articulated it, perhaps it's getting nearer to retirement, that you're rethinking some of the commitments that you may have had in the past.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. I don't know, maybe 2 years from now or 3 years from now there will be a change of view. I mean, after I'm retired.
Right.
Once I'm into retirement and I know what that's all about, maybe I'll feel a need to kind of associate more strongly, become more involved time-wise in other kinds of activities. But that remains to be seen, because right now, I mean, retirement is like a door through which I have to
Right.
pass, and I'm not completely sure what's on the other
Right.
side of that door. Perhaps you can tell me about that a little bit. I'll interview you.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm in this, what I call this transition stage for this year and next year. So I'm a little bit familiar with it, and it is a change. I mean, there's no question about that.
Yeah.
I mean, your routine changes. In my case, having spent 15 years having people schedule my life for me in the ad building,
Yeah.
and now all of a sudden I have a lot more control of my schedule, which candidly gives me the opportunity to do studies like this, which I really enjoy. About a year and a half from now, I'm going to walk through that same door to full retirement, which my wife walked through a couple of years ago from her position as an elementary teacher in Muncie, and she's loved it and she just thrives on it. But it's a whole new experience.
Yeah,
I mean,
and I'm not sure how I will react to it because
Yeah.
I mean, I could retire. I mean, we're off track here. I
Sure,
realize
that's
that.
all right. Yeah.
I could retire now, I suppose.
Sure.
You know, but I'm not sure I really want to.
Yeah.
There are some things that I really like
Right.
to look forward to. I'm not trying to say that I look forward to every single aspect or dimension of the job, but there are still some things that I look forward to and that I enjoy doing. So I'm not sure I want to give those up. But as I said, until I pass through that door,
Yeah.
you know, I'm kind of, you know, trepidatious here a little bit. From the financial point of view too, I'm a little concerned. I mean,
Well, we all are because of the market and our
well, some
portfolio.
more than others. I mean, you know, you're in a little different position than
Yeah.
I am, and you know, and everybody's different to some degree. So, I mean, that's another thing. I mean, I don't know whether people have talked to you about the actual cost of membership or whether, you know.
Yeah, they have. In fact, I meant, or I spent some time talking to a few people about that system.
Yeah, I don't want to get into personalities here, but you know, there's a wide range of incomes in the temple.
Sure.
So,
Very wide range of incomes.
and so it will, you know, the dues can affect people differently. You know, obviously for that reason. Well, anyhow, no, when I came here, my wife actually had an interesting experience when she came here separately from my. I was still actually finishing up my graduate studies at Ohio State at the time, and she came early because she had to begin the month. We had an apartment here first, so she had to get the apartment, put the money down for the rent and all that, sign the lease at the beginning of the month. Which at that time they still run a quarter system. When I came here, and so again, another odd thing is that I came in the middle of the year. I came in December, so she had to be here December 1st, whereas I couldn't finish my work at that date. I had to wait until the middle of the month when the quarter at Ohio State. They were in the quarters also, interestingly. So there was a kind of symbiosis there, which kind of appealed to me in some strange way. So finals, you know, all that weren't over until like December 15th or so, and so I came later. Anyhow, when she told me that when she came here with the truck, she was appalled. She thought the city was she came through the south side of the city, and she just kind of wondered what I had done to her, where I had taken her when she first saw Muncie.
I think a lot of wives have that reaction.
Yeah, and she marked, in fact, the very first night they had to stay at the Holiday Inn on Madison Street because the apartment wasn't officially leased at that time. And so she had this kind of bad experience initially coming into the city. Okay. She didn't approach it from perhaps its best foot forward, so to speak.
Which is kind of interesting given what she does for a living now.
And on top of that, when she found this apartment, which we kind of inquired about over the phone from Columbus, the truck with all of our things in it apparently had to turn in a rather tight drive. It was the Riverside apartments down here, Riverside, and there's a lot of hills in the back part of the building there, a ravine or something. So anyhow, the truck actually tipped over, and she just was horrified. And so those were some of the initial experiences of her initial move to Muncie, which again was perhaps not
terribly positive.
Yeah, but as I said, I came later, didn't have any real problems. I mean, the apartment was all very fine, and everything was okay.
One of the questions that I asked participants in this study 23 years ago focused on relationships between Jewish members of the Muncie community and non-Jewish members of the community, which was a really big issue 23 years ago. Do you think that that's still as much of an issue in Muncie?
Jewish members?
Yeah, people who are Jewish in the community and those who are non-Jewish, because
Gentiles, in other words.
well, yeah, and of course I refer to this as sort of the Marty Schwartz generation, that those people had very vivid memories in their lives of restricted housing and restricted clubs and things like that. And so when I interviewed a lot of those people, that was a pretty raw issue. So I decided that I would use the question now 23 years later and ask each of the participants in this study if they think that's much of an issue in Muncie anymore.
I'm not sure, again, how to respond. Whether I don't really have that much in the way of interaction with non-Jews, to be quite honest with you.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I don't really have very many close friends who I see, frequently and can base a statement on.
Okay.
Most of my friends were associated with the university and the Jewish community, primarily the latter. And many of those have gone for various reasons. So I don't know if I could really respond to that. Again, just as a little historical note here, though, it's kind of a paradox in a way. I'm sure you're familiar with the name of Clarence Benedum.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Anyhow, he is probably the most kind of archetypal, anti-Semite or kind of clan-like individual one would possibly think of. But it's kind of ironic in that presently I am now living in his house. And when we first moved here and looked, to the basement and some of the areas that don't always get full attention when someone moves out, we found some old copies of his broadsheet, the X-ray. And so I do have a couple of those.
A virulent anti-Semitic paper.
But I mean, I've never really had any specific encounters with people like that. As I said, I don't really have very much interaction with
that was kind
Jews or non-Jews, as a matter of fact, because, as I said, most of the Jewish people that I was close to are retired or they've moved away at various times for various reasons, which over the years you kind of get accustomed to. That is, you kind of expect that in a university situation that relationships are not permanent. You have to kind of enjoy them for the at their utmost in the time that is permitted to you. And I've always kind of kept that in mind and tried to do that and had a lot of nice memories from our attachments, our friendships over the years. But I can't really think of anyone in particular that was very close to me who was not Jewish. I've had acquaintances.
Well, let me push
right
that.
now I have a person who's a graduate student who is in the Department of History. He's very much interested in philately, and we go to exhibitions, local, regional. But that's a rather kind of, superficial, maybe, not entirely.
One of the things I'm looking for, to be blunt, is whether or not in your life, either before you came to Muncie or in Muncie, you've experienced overt or covert anti-Semitism.
When I first came to the university, I remember I did take off a day for Yom Kippur, and it was docked. My pay was docked for that day. That was back in 1969. And I remember Mort Rosenberg. I told Mort because I knew he was Jewish, and he kind of befriended me when I first came here.
And he was my faculty friend, too.
I told him about it, and Mort and I went to see John Pruis. We went to meet with him directly about the issue. And he was very apologetic, and but still, I mean, that happened.
Right.
But, of course, since then, the university has changed quite a bit. But that's the only thing I can really think of that would remotely approach any negative. And I think it wasn't really a kind of overt thing on the part of the university. I just think they were not sensitive to it.
I would agree.
I just think they were not aware of it. It's not something that they deliberately, did or had a policy, for. But it's changed quite a bit, and
certainly in that regard. Well, a more specific question then that we've kicked around a little bit just in conversation before we began the interview, and that is, how do you see the future of Temple Bethel?
That's a difficult question, and I'm sure you've gotten a lot of different answers. But probably they all fall in one or two categories, either positive or negative.
Well, some are kind of neutral. I mean, I'll be candid with you and say that I actually have had some people say, well, there'll always be a Temple Bethel, and there might not be very many members, but there's a building, and now there's a wonderful addition to the building that I'm going to ask you about in a minute. But it's a pretty important edifice. It occupies a prominent place on the main thoroughfare of the community. So I think based on that perspective, a number of people have said, well, it's always going to be there. So it's not that it's a neutral position, either yes or no, but it's kind of, I guess, more in the middle, as I would see it. But you've been part of that community for a long time, and I'm just asking you to speculate a little bit on what you think it might be like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now.
Well, you're correct. The building probably will always be there. Okay. But whether it will be a Jewish institution or not, that's another issue. Well, if you go into bigger cities, you can find the temple I was bar mitzvahed in, for example, in Cleveland, very much like Bethel, architecturally, physically, very much like you walk up the long flight of stairs, which is very traditional historically, architecturally. This whole idea of uplift and going up. Right. Exact same kind of institution. Now it's not a Jewish temple. And
is it a religious?
It's yes. It was taken over by, I believe, the African Methodist church or something. Yeah. But that was many, many years ago. And so, yeah, the building is still there, and even then, the building has been altered physically. Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to be somewhat, negative, perhaps, yes, the building will be there, but will it be a Jewish institution, and will the building retain its architectural integrity? I can't say. I don't know. Based on my experiences, I question that. Okay. I seriously question that. If you're looking long range, like 25 years, 30, 40, 50 years, I really question that. Okay. If there is some kind of change that I can't see right now, such as maybe getting a full-time rabbi, maybe, again, for some unknown reason, there occurs a large influx of, Jewish people, which obviously would not be business people, most likely, since we're in the age of the chain store and all that. Exactly. Maybe then there will be a rebirth, a renaissance. Maybe things are cyclic. I hope they are. I hope they are. But again, I don't really feel very hopeful. Okay. That's my general feeling. I mean, if you look at the big picture, if you look at really what some of the first generation or earlier members said, like, again, I come back to Bernard Friend, and his comments, he notes, even back then, he remembers listening in the 30s how Schoenfield was talking about the decline of the community. Yeah. What is the big picture? What is the long trend? Not the little ups and downs. Yeah. That's what we have to be concerned about. I would agree. And also, this idea of being hopeful, Bernard Friend, again, I keep coming back to Bernard. That's interesting things to say. He was very hopeful in the sense that he feels that the world is becoming more kind, more loving. I think those were his concluding remarks. And again, I don't see it that way. I think we're entering into a phase of world anti-Semitism, and it's increasingly becoming more important an issue. And I think it's causing the United States a lot of problems. And I don't know to what degree the United States is going to be willing to stand up for what is right.
I just wonder if Bernard...
And this gets into a lot of other issues here. I don't want to get off the track, but you can kind of control the situation as you see fit.
But would Bernard have felt that way if he had lived to see 9/11? I really wonder about that. Because I think 9/11 has really been a real watershed in world opinion. Yeah. Whether it's toward...
well, I know. Yeah, well, I mean, he was talking from his perspective. And that interview that he gave, or that statement that he made was in 1979.
Exactly.
So I mean, we're
I would
all.
have shared his optimism in 1979.
Yeah.
But I don't share his. I mean, if someone were to say that today, in January of 2003, I would think that optimism was really misplaced.
Yeah.
I'm like you. I'm pretty pessimistic about the situation that is, the larger world picture right now.
Yeah.
Well, we're really getting off the track.
Yeah. Okay.
Specific question.
Okay.
What do you think is the significance?
Well, I mean, it was related to your general question
Yeah.
of how I see the
the
temple.
future of the temple.
And one thing is related to the other. I mean, it's all.
Agreed.
So in a sense, we're not completely off the track. Okay, go ahead. What was your?
Well, my question was how important you think the addition of the temple is to the future of it.
Looking at it from my perspective, it's not all that important right now for me. It's nice. I enjoy it. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, when my children were growing up, that's when I really could have used it. That's when I really would have appreciated it. I mean, we had 2 bar mitzvahs here, and we had in the basement of the old building, cramped, crowded, but in many ways nice in some ways. But still, that's when we could have used it. So, it seems like a lot of nice things or better things have happened, after the fact for me. I mean, when I had my bar mitzvahs, there were no hotels in Muncie. My out-of-town guests had to stay in, where do they stay? Well, they had to stay either at the University Hotel here in the Student Center, or they stayed at the Holiday Inn. Or, they didn't have the choices that are now available.
Right, yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of things like that. The temple addition is related to a lot of other kinds of changes like that have occurred in Muncie. In Muncie in general. But those changes have occurred, as I said, at a time when I really could not maximize their use, when I could not really utilize them fully.
Okay.
So, and whether or not, I know that the building of that addition was undertaken with the hope of attracting people.
Yeah, that's true.
From outlying areas, perhaps, or from Indianapolis or Anderson or wherever. But I don't think that's really happened. I don't know that that's really happened. Okay. And as I said, I think something else is going to have to happen of a real significant nature. Perhaps it's the idea of this attempt to get a full-time rabbi. Maybe it will require something else.
How important do you think that is to the future of the temple to have a full-time rabbi?
At best, it's only part of the solution. At best, and when I say part, I would say 50% at best. There still needs to be those underlying forces that will draw Jews here, other than just simply, I mean, people don't come here because of some rabbi. I mean, we're not going to get Rabbi, what's this guy's name from Harvard?
Oh, he's somebody of great repute.
Yeah,
I know who you mean.
He's always on television.
Yeah. Well, no, you're not going to get somebody like that to come to a congregation beside you. Yeah.
Anyhow, I mean,
you're going to get young students. You're going to get the kind of people
you
you
and
have
so,
now.
I mean, why would people want to come here? Except for economic, professional, reasons.
Well, that's part of, you might as well get to that question. My working hypothesis for this study, as I told you before we began our interview, is that if there were no Ball State and no Ball Memorial Hospital, I'm not sure that there would be a Temple Bethel.
Yeah.
And I've posed that question to all the people participating in this study and said, okay, what do you think of that? If you take all the names in the current directory of Temple Bethel, who are individuals brought here to practice medicine or to be part of an academic community, and you take them out, there isn't much left.
It's true.
And I think the future of the temple really has a lot to do with the growth of the hospital and people who might come to affiliate with it to practice medicine who are practicing Jews and want to be part of Temple Bethel congregation.
Yeah.
And the same thing with the university. I mean, I just can't see any influx of people who are going to be part of the business community who would be drawn here by changes in that part of Muncie. There are people who are going to come here either to be part of the health system or the academic system, because they're by far now the major employers and the major importers of talent, if you will.
Yes.
And that's the growth in the temple over the last 23 years. I mean, the people who have come here who are now very active in the temple are largely Ball State people, or they came here with, as part of the Ball State community, or they're in the medical community.
Yeah.
So if that's not there, I mean, my question, as I said, to go back and pose it again, is there much of a Temple Bethel if you don't have the hospital and you don't have the university?
No, there isn't. The rabbi becomes a secondary issue. As I said, at best, just half of the equation, at best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree.
Another, unrelated to all this, I finish with your question?
No, I got one more.
Okay.
Let me give you the one more. The one more is almost kind of your wish list, that if you had the opportunity to do 2 or 3 things that might ensure the Temple Bethel congregation continuing on to the future, what would you put on your list?
There's nothing I could do personally.
Okay. Well, no, I'm not asking you personally. I'm just thinking larger in the aggregate, in the larger picture. I mean, this is where the full-time rabbi thing usually comes up, because when I pose this question to a lot of members of the congregation, the first thing they grab onto is, well, we need a full-time rabbi.
No, I don't know if that's the solution. I mean, there's nothing in the aggregate, or however you want to phrase it, that I can see that would perpetuate or would ensure the perpetuation of Temple Bethel.
Okay.
The social forces at work are very large here, okay, and we have to keep those things in mind.
Yeah.
And
spoken like a true historian. Forces we have no control over as individuals in many cases. Yeah.
I feel strongly about determinism.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's right. I mean, it's what draws people to a community, and what you've got now.
That's what drew me in large part.
Yeah.
And
yeah, me too.
And I just don't know what else I could tell you.
Well, let me.
This is not something new that Ken Davis has invented or thought of the first time. It's just something that's.
Well, you're part of the university community.
Common.
Let me throw one at you, because it's been a great avenue of success for Ball State in the last decade or so. What about enhanced endowments for the temple? I mean, what if you had a significant influx of cash that became endowed funds to do things with, as we've been able to do things with those kinds of endowments at the university? Do you think that would be something that might help ensure the future of the temple?
Well, again, I'm not all that hopeful, even assuming that we have these funds. We do have endowments now. Bernard Friend, I think, has left some money for some things, and the Zieglers, I think, have left some money. So people have left money. There are some endowments, I believe, out there, and I don't know whether they, in and of themselves, have done much, one way or the other. They've not hurt, certainly. I mean, they've called attention to the existence of the Jewish community to some degree. They have publicized the Jewish community to some degree, so that's been good. But whether they have significantly affected the demographics of the Jewish community, I don't think so. Whether there would be more endowments, again, I don't know how they would be used so that they could affect the demographics. That's what we're really talking about here. We're talking about people and the things that motivate people, especially in a capitalist economy.
Yeah, that's true. I agree.
And so, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Well, as I said, those are the questions I have, but I do want to give you a chance to add any other perspectives or make any other comments about this that you wish.
Well, the only thing I perhaps might mention, and again, I'm kind of here treading on a little thin ice here, is that in some ways the fact that the history of the Jewish community, at least now, not in the past, because Rothenberg, I believe, was involved with it.
Right.
But now, the fact that it's being written by a non-Jew, in some ways, I think is, to be neutral, interesting.
Oh, okay.
And I'm just really wondering how that might be changed, or to what new perspectives might have been given to this history if it had been written by a Jew.
Oh, okay.
Just as you might wonder, for example, if the history of your church was written by a Muslim. That might be a little extreme here.
Yeah.
Or at least, someone who is not a Christian.
Yeah.
You kind of wonder how he would interpret the history of the First Presbyterian Church, or at least what emotional nuances that he could give to the history of the First Presbyterian Church.
Oh, yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
And so I feel a little, perhaps, I don't know, I wonder a little bit about that.
Okay.
Because there are certain things, you know, that you feel about things that you've been cultured with, you know, over a long period of time that become lost in the translation.
Oh, I think that's true.
You have all these
Yeah.
facts here,
Yeah.
but there are other things that are only felt on a deeper level.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and they're,
kind of,
they're more than just subtle nuances. I mean, I agree with that. I think my role in this has been more as a student of Muncie as Middletown writ large, and having had the opportunity given to me 23 years ago, along with Dwight Hoover, whose background is Quaker, to do the interviews that we did. I mean, in my case, having grown up in an area in New York City that was largely Jewish and ethnic Roman Catholic, I mean, I brought to the table, if you will, a lot more knowledge of Jewish communities, although admittedly in an urban setting, as you experienced it in Cleveland, than in a small town setting like Muncie, than Dwight did with his Quaker background. So we had two very different perspectives. That, of course, what we did was to take those interviews 23 years ago, and then many years after we did them, give them to Dan Rottenberg, whose perspective was very different, although he didn't do the interviews. What he got were the transcripts, and then had the opportunity to put all this together. But it's a very valid point.
So, I mean, I don't know. That's one of the things I think I wonder about as far as the study in general.
Yeah.
But other than that, I don't really have too much more to say, except that, again, you know, when I talk about this idea of, the emotional dimension, there is a certain kind of price that one pays by, living in an environment that is, like Muncie, when you're from a place that is so different. In some respects, and so there is a kind of price that you pay, but it's not all bad. I'm not trying to say it's all, don't misinterpret me here, I'm not trying to say that it's all negative. There have been a lot of positives that perhaps I would not have experienced. I mean, if I had perhaps lived my entire life in a large urban area, I might not have become as concerned with affiliation and, the membership in a temple, because I would have had all of the other things.
You would have taken them more for granted, I think.
And so it has, in some ways, maybe made me delve deeper into who I am. It's made me understand myself a little bit more. It's forced me to fall back on myself and to question myself in some ways. And so you pay a price, but yet you gain something too. And so that's, I think, how I would read it.
Thank you very much for participating.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Okay.